I can see both of you now. It was well. Hello, Silvia. Long time to see. Hi. It's well. First of all, I didn't know about the Wortschatz corpus. I've been playing with it while you were talking, and it's an extremely interesting and very new resource. I'd never seen anything of the sort. So thank you very much for sharing that. I will definitely talk about it with my students this afternoon, or in about 45 minutes. I was wondering if you have any, about the Opus Corpus interface, do you know of any way of using the interface but being able to select the source language? Because there you have the problem of never knowing whether you're looking at originals in English. I mean, obviously you can select the texts in which you want to search for your word, but you don't know whether that was the language in which that text was originally produced, and what are the translations. So sometimes you find that you look for English and German, but the original maybe was in French, and you're looking at two translations, and maybe those were not even direct translation from one to the other. So sometimes I find it difficult with students because they want to know what the source language is and what the target language is, rather than just saying these are two equivalents and you just take them as equivalents or co-equivalents. Do you know if there's any way of selecting?
Yeah, that's a big problem. We started by downloading the original text files, and we filtered them according to the meta information of the text, and we have a local version for English German where we know these are English originals and German translations, and these are German originals and English translations. But in the newest online version, there, for some corpora, not for all of them, but for some corpora, you can do an advanced search, and there you can specify the language of the speaker. And this, of course, helps. If the language of the speaker is, for example, Spanish, then the original is Spanish. I still don't know whether it was translated via English, English first and then German. For German, that's not very probable because most of the cabins are there for German. But for other languages, of course, you never know whether there's a relay language. But still, it helps to know what the original was. So there's an advanced search option for some corpora, and I hope they will do it for all of them.
Thanks. Thanks.
Okay, so we have another question. How can we define representativeness in corpus-based translation studies? Which is a rather big question. I think it's addressed towards the more experienced speakers available today. So would anyone like to tackle this question?
One of the Silvias.
Yes, one of the.
It's difficult, of course. Well, I'm going to start, and then you can take over. That's of course difficult. I define representativeness in correspondence to the research task or to the translation task I'm going to fulfill. If my students have to translate, for example, shareholders' letters, a corpus would be very useful. Which includes shareholders' letters, of course. If I would like to look into fictional texts in my research, a corpus of shareholders' letters is not of help. So representativeness should, first of all, be defined by the register, which is of importance. The second thing, Douglas Biber investigated or found out that it is very useful to have at least 10 texts or text snippets with 1,000 words. So you can do contrastive research with subcorpora including 10,000 words, including in turn 10 texts with each, 1,000 words each. So this is the bottom line you have to use. Of course, this is representative then for one subcorpus. Of course, the larger the better. And if you have features which are rarely used in the corpus, then again you need a bigger corpus. So balancedness and representativeness go hand in hand, in my opinion. But Silvia might add something to this very big question.
Well, it is a very big question, and I think we're faced with this question also as researchers, not just our learners. I mean, we always have to justify our claims about representativeness. This is an example of an open-ended problem, because there is no right solution to the question of, like Silvia was saying, there's no right or wrong solution. I mean, there's no one out there who will be able to tell you the corpus is right for your purposes or it's wrong for your purposes. But that's the whole point of building a corpus. It's learners should learn not to look for an external authority who tells them that they carried out a certain operation properly, because this is something they will not have in their careers. They have to learn to evaluate case by case. And this is, I think, one of the reasons why they need to build corpora, because by having them evaluate the representativeness of their corpora and asking them to ask themselves questions, they will develop that sort of attitude that allows them to make their own evaluations in the future. So being more practical as a teaching activity, as a learning activity, I've been faced with this problem with the projects that my students carried out. When they ask me how many texts, okay, sometimes representativeness becomes a question about how much, how many words, how many texts, and asking me, right? So I wouldn't know what to tell them. So what I do is I tell them, design a small table where you, first of all, decide whether your corpus is going to have subcorpora or not. So going back to shareholders' letters that have been mentioned before. First of all, ask yourselves what you want the corpus to be representative of. If the corpus has to be representative of shareholders' letters from the English-speaking world in general, then you have to sample geographically, and you decide that you want English, British, American, Australian, let's say, and you just keep those three countries. But then you have to be aware that there are other countries and that there's also international English produced in no-native countries. So are you going to include those or not? There's no right or wrong question again. The whole point is saying in your description of the corpus that can, of course, be related to your translation task. So if you're translating a shareholder letter that has to be received or read by an international audience, you may say, I want to also include international English as a lingua franca texts. Or if you have to carry out a translation for a translation task for text that is going to be read in Europe, you want to say, I'm going to focus on the British variety of English and exclude all the other varieties. And then once you've done that, you say, well, I'm going to include, say, 15 texts or 10 texts. And I'm not going to provide any subdivision in terms of field, for instance, of the shareholders' text or a company that produces the shareholders' letters. If you're going to say, I want to compare food producing and oil producing companies, then you have to have at least maybe 20 texts, 10 in each subfield. So what I'm saying is that evaluating representativeness is not it's certainly not an easy task. It's something that you learn in the same way as you learn to consult corpora. You also learn to design a corpus, and you learn through practice. You also learn cyclically, because you first build a small corpus, and then you realize that maybe you don't have enough evidence, and you add more text. This is also something that we should keep in mind. It's not a finished process. It's something that goes on. And what I always tell my students is that they have to be prepared to justify their choices. So it's more a question of justifying what they did and having other people evaluate their decisions, rather than finding the ideal balance in a corpus.
Okay, thank you too for your very deep and insightful answers. If I may just add, I agree that representativeness always has to be seen relative to a specific epistemic aim. In my rather quick and dirty approach I presented in my talk, representativeness, it certainly receded into the background, because you always want to find an appropriate solution rather quickly. I think when you query the internet as a corpus itself, you should certainly look for, if you just find 5 to 10 results on Google or something, then that may tell you that you're in kind of trouble with the solution you found there. So you should aim at several thousand hits at least. I can't tell you whether it should be 7,000, 10,000, 15,000, but important is that you check the website where the search strings come from. If it's like we had these examples with Deutsche Bank, if you find the strings on the websites of authoritative organizations and on several of them, and you have, say, some thousand hits, I think then you can assume that that the solution you found there is representative of authentic language used there. But it is quite difficult, and it's not a central topic of my quick and dirty approach to using Corpora presented today. There was another question. How can we get future access to the recording of this session and to the PowerPoint presentations, as they would be useful for future reference? Well, the recording will be made available on the IATIS website, certainly for members. I hear to members only. Maybe this can be negotiated, I'm not quite sure. It will be available for IATIS members. As to the PowerPoint presentations, I'm not quite sure. I'm happy to share mine. I think we'll check this with IATIS, and I think the others are happy too. Yeah. We'll check this with IATIS and make the information available on the conference website, on the Cologne website for this IATIS training event. As I said, I'm happy to share mine. I don't see why this should be problematic. We'll make the information available to you. Okay. Silvia Bernardini is fine as well. There was something more. What would be your suggestions for the cultivation of students' research and analytical skills in corpus-based or assisted translation training? Silvia, would you like to?
I think.
Okay, just a second. There you go.
My turn.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go first. I've been thinking about it. I saw the question while you were speaking, because this is a very difficult question. I think one way, something that the students would appreciate, is not seeing Corpora used only in technology modules. This is something that pedagogically would help, because we tend to have a sort of, even just because of the difficulty of organizing the syllabus, what we tend to do is have a sort of compartmentalized teaching scenario where corpora are used in technology courses, but then and a little bit in translation courses, but then in literature, in other types of translation, in linguistics, etc., translation courses and linguistics, etc., we stop using them. We see them only as technology. But because the point is developing the analytical skills, like the questioner said, the point is, once they've mastered the technical skills, then the corpora have to be used for a practical purpose in a situation where the technical skills are just taken for granted, and you focus on other skills, like, for instance, analyzing language. You analyze translations, but while you analyze translations and you focus on the context of production, on translation norms, translation theory in general, you also say, well, let us see what other translators have done, and you consult a corpus or parallel corpus maybe that you have available, so that the students see that what they learned as a technical skill also has a practical application and is a practical relevance to all the other competence developing modules that are not technically oriented, if you see what I mean. I don't know if this answers the question.
And I think corpora are very natural in translation work, and they used to be very natural 20 years ago. I mean, every translator 20 years ago worked with parallel text. So that's not a new phenomenon. So that's a traditional thing. And the advantage we have today is to use them in a digital way, to search them more efficiently, and to have a kind of administration of our parallel text. So we can call them corpus and not only an archive, for example. So I think every and each translator and translation student should be motivated to use texts, balanced texts, representative texts, useful texts for them, and to search them very efficient and to just learn these techniques. So there should be an intrinsic motivation as well.
Thank you very much. There was something else on statistics here. Corpus analysis in corpus linguistics depends heavily on elaborate statistical methods. Do you think that we need such statistical methods in corpus-based or corpus-driven translation studies? Professor Bernardini, would you like to start again?
Sure. Yes, again, a very interesting, very good question. I do think we need those methods. I also think that the fact that parallel corpora have been used somewhat less than monolingual comparable corpora in many approaches, say not all approaches, certainly not Silvia Hansen's approach to corpus-based translation studies, but for instance, in the Mona Baker tradition paradigm, monolingual comparable corpora are certainly amenable to easier comparisons using statistical methods. When you compare across languages, or across two different languages, I think, like we do in parallel corpus analysis, I think the main, obviously statistics are still relevant, but the main issue is the theoretical tertium comparationes that you have to establish between the two languages first. So analysis or say systemic oriented analysis of the two languages, as well as the translation, the comparison of the parallel corpora. For the first part, you definitely need statistics. I'm not saying that you don't need it for corpus analysis, for parallel corpus analysis, but in my experience, many times when you analyze parallel corpora, you want to look at the actual parallel concordances, not just say global statements about trends, which are the sort of data that statistics are better for. Okay, so they're more adequate for. So you have, I think, in translation studies, we need to strike a balance between the advanced statistical methods to develop insights about what happens in translation in a monolingual perspective, or in reference corpora, or in the two languages being compared, but also keep analyzing the actual language occurrences across the two languages or more than two languages in the parallel multilingual corpora.
Yeah, I agree. I totally agree. I think it's not important, or not necessarily important for a translator to use statistical methods, because a practical translator might use a corpus as an inspiration for his work. But in corpus-based or corpus-driven translation studies, it's essential to know whether an example and a result is figured out by chance, or whether it has a meaning, a statistical significance. And so we need to use statistical methods in order to to differentiate between these two. And you can also calculate cause-effect relations by more elaborate statistical methods, regression analyses, and so on. And I think we are at the very beginning in our discipline, and we have to elaborate on this further. Yeah.
Thank you, Silvia. I agree what you said, that it is certainly relevant or must be factored in corpus-based translation research, not so much in when you use it as a translation aid. Again, my approach is somewhat set apart here. We want to convince students that corpora can be useful in their immediate translation work, and I think you shouldn't mention the word statistics if you want to achieve this goal. So it's a different approach, but certainly in translation, in corpus-based research, not so much perhaps in a translation practice. Are there any more questions from the audience? Have you tried using Translationcorpora in a CAT environment as translation memories? Personally, I haven't yet. Maybe the other two, have you had any experience with this? Silvia, would you?
Yes, we use Translationcorpora with translation memories. Well, there you have the problem of big data. Well, if you work with translation memories, they used to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the corpus gets bigger as well. And so you have somehow to select which is old data, which is data which you cannot use anymore because of false terminology or not updated terminology, stuff like this. So here we have a big data problem, in fact, and we have to filter out the good versus the bad data. But we also use Translationcorpora for post-editing purposes. We take part in the CAT project, chaired by the Copenhagen Business School. Michael Karl is responsible, and there we use machine translation as an input for human translation in technical translation texts. And there, of course, corpora are built up of machine translation, but also of human translated text. And we try to improve the machine translation via our post-editing and via the human parallel translations. And this is a nice approach, but it's only usable for very specific registers and for very specific translation tasks. Yeah.
If I can add something to Sylvia's answer, for us, hold on. Let's see how this can be worded. With the translation memories, I think. Obviously, the main difference here is the fact that in translation memories you don't keep track of the whole or the sequentiality of the text, or in many cases you don't get that. Obviously, nowadays with MemoQ, for instance, which doesn't where you don't have to align the text and the alignment is done on the fly while you search for a word, the approach is much more. It's much more similar to that of corpus use rather than translation memory, traditional translation memory use, where you have separate units and you don't see the unit before or after. And I think the same nowadays happens with the exact or golden match, whatever it's called in Trados. I'm not a Trados user.
Perfect match.
Myself. What's it called?
I think it's called perfect match.
Perfect match. So you see what comes before and after. Because with translation memory, with the traditional translation memory approach, you lose sight of the textual coherence. And I think what we want to make sure that students know that the co-text is important. And another aspect is that within translation memory software, you don't always have, or computer-aided translation software, you don't always have the same sophistication in the ability to search using regular expressions. So advanced searches in Corpora is much more advanced than advanced searches in translation memory software. even though, for instance, Omega T is very good in its search capabilities. So in fact, you can use translation memories in Omega T in a way that is much more similar to corpus use. Having said that, I think Tatiana also asked about format conversion. If I can follow up, since it's related, I think, to the previous question. What we did in the past was, I'm not sure if she's referring to this, but the idea that it would ideally would be good to be able to export a parallel aligned file in both translation memory format and corpus use format. So not having the TMX for the corpus, but having it for the translation memory format parallel aligned file. For this purpose, we used an aligner called Intertext that was developed by Pavel Vondrica. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. It's a Czech name, and that is available from the it's freely available. And the Intertext aligner was developed for corpus alignment, not for translation memory alignment. But we asked Pavel to add the possibility of exporting both as an aligned file and as a translation memory TMX format file. So that can be imported directly to Omega T and Trados. I haven't tried it with other CAT tools, but it certainly works with Trados and with Omega T. So if you're interested in that, the possibility of aligning files and then using them both as corpora and as translation memories, I suggest you look up the Intertext aligner. I'm trying to write it in the chat.
Okay, thanks. I think Tatiana, she wants to add something.
May I meet? Sorry.
Builders. Well, that's a difficult question again. What other tools? Well, I mentioned Tatiana, are you interested in parallel corpora or monolingual or bilingual corpora for translation tasks? Parallel. What do we suggest? Well, AntConch has a parallel search tool, which I haven't. It's called AntConch, I think. I haven't tried it myself because we use the CWB. We use the Corpus Workbench for parallel corpora. Like, I don't know if Silvia, if you use the same tool, but it is not adequate for use by non-linguists. Well, we use it via the command line, so that would not be an option. I'm not sure what to suggest in terms of parallel corpus builders and also search engines for professionals. I don't know if Ralph maybe knows or Silvia.
There is a tool called ParaConch, I think, which you can use to align and search parallel or translation corpora. I think it must be called ParaConch. We didn't use it because we found it was too time consuming. Again, we have this in vivo perspective in our course. But if you want to take your time and study corpora in depth, I think ParaConch would be a good place to start for parallel or translation corpora.
Yes, and for more advanced purposes, you can use the Corpus Query Processor, CQP, but I think that's the same like the Corpus Workbench. And all these online corpora, the Opus Corpus, for example, they are all based on CQP. So if you get used to it with the online corpora, it's also quite handy to use it for your own corpora. But I would like to comment one comment by Jakub, I think, who said that big data is better than zero data. And that's of course true. Big data is better than zero data, but that's where corpus linguistics comes into play. A structured corpus is better than big data in terms. So we have research corporations with big companies in Germany like SAP, car companies, Daimler, BMW, who work, of course, with translation memories and who have freelancers as post editors, but they spend so much money with into post editing that they now cooperate with us in order to use corpus linguistic methods to filter their translation memories, their big data. And we use, for example, text mining methods in order to find terminology which is not longer in use and to filter these sentences out of the corpora to get structured corpora again. So I think that's where corpus linguistics exactly comes into play in order to make structured corpora out of big data.
Just check whether we missed a question. I don't think so. There were some suggestions for corpus tools. Or you could also, I mean, it's not a parallel corpus tool, but if you just want to make some first steps in corpus analysis, you can use these online concordances such as WebCorp Live, which offer these very basic functions, but they're free, they're quick to use, and you can just, you know, get the first feel of corpus use and then move on to more professional tools like Wordsmith or ParaConch or whatever. Let me just check whether we missed something.
While Ralph is searching, I can also mention this other tool called Context. It's a source of parallel corpora. I'm trying to find the link. It's again, it's a corpus developed at Charles University Prague. I can't paste in the chat, unfortunately. And it's a collection of texts of literary texts in several languages that have been translated into Czech. But for instance, if there's an Italian novel that has been translated into Czech and into English, they also have the Italian and English versions. So it can be used by people, interested in novels or literary language, translated from and into many languages, not necessarily including Czech. So again, this is an interesting resource. And something else that could be of interest is also the No Sketch engine. I don't know if you're familiar with the No Sketch engine. No Sketch engine, meaning that it uses a free open source version of the same corpus indexer and query service that the Sketch engine uses. And there's one installation of the corpus in Slovenia. I don't remember exactly, but I can send Ralph a list of references to freely accessible corpora with web interfaces that can be used by learners, and so that we could add that to the Opus corpus and maybe have a short list of sharing the corpora that we normally use in our teaching, so that other people can get an idea of resources and links. If you agree, that could be easily done.
Yeah, sure. We can publish it on the website then. Are there any more questions from the audience? Okay, then I think we're done with the discussion. Thank you to all participants. Bear with us for a couple of minutes for some closing words by Professor Kreinkuhle, who is a member of the IATIS training committee. She'll be with us in a second.
Okay, I would like to thank all participants and above all our speakers, Silvia Bernardini, Ralf Krüger and Silvia Hansen-Schirra very much for their valuable contributions, all of which have shed light on how Corpora can best be used in translator training to successfully perform a variety of tasks and to build up specific translation-relevant competencies such as tools and research competence, translation service provision competence, and language and intercultural competence. The integration of Corpora and tools into translation courses, as we have seen, will help students to fulfill the ever-increasing requirements of professional translation settings. A big thank you to our technical support team, Oliver Janni, Joachim Pelz, and Ralf Krüger for getting the technology going. As Ralf has mentioned, the recorded event will be made available to IATIS members, and we will discuss whether this will be made available to a larger group of people. Before I close, let me draw your attention to the next IATIS training event, which is likely to be held in November this year in Sarajevo. Further information will be made available in due course. Thank you again for your attention, and goodbye for now.